So I'm Rosie, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how I think our relationships with public space have changed since 2007, drawing significantly on my experience at Wellcome collection in London, which opened in that very same year. In my opinion, these changes in our relationship with public space has given rise to an even more urgent need to bring different perspectives together. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. I love public spaces. I feel invigorated by parks, beaches, forests, public squares. They give me room. They help me to think. I can breathe more freely in them because I have a greater sense of anonymity, and I can be truer to myself. They make me look up to see beyond what might be immediately possible. I first consciously discovered this when studying for my GCSEs just down the road from here in Malvern. I struggled to concentrate at home, so I would take my notes out with me and sit on a bench on the Malvern Hills and stay on that bench until I got my head around a certain concept or idea, and then I would move on to another bench to learn something else. Many years later, in 2006, I moved to London to start a new job. I had the opportunity to discover a whole new city. Armed with an A to Z in my pocket and my bicycle, I discovered canalways and public squares and parks and the river. Surrounded by people who I didn't know, I had a great freedom and a real sense of adventure, free from distractions and alert to possibility. But in recent years, many have raised alarms in relation to the privatisation of these kinds of spaces. Due to austerity and budget cuts, local authorities are increasingly selling off land to private developers. In 2017, The Guardian newspaper led an investigation into this in London, mapping areas affected and gaining an understanding of the consequences. They argued that we're in the midst of the biggest common land sell-off since the 17th and 18th centuries. These pseudo-public spaces are emerging in cities around the UK. For example, Brindley Place here in Birmingham. These are essentially public spaces purchased by property developers who enforce certain rules. So they appear to be public, but aren't quite that. As Bradley L. Garrett argues, and I quote, "In most of these pseudo-public spaces, the property owners refuse to post what rules are enforced on the property, meaning that you often only know if you breach them when you are told that you have done so, and that they may, in fact, be making up those rules on the spot. Considering that these rules have been used to preclude protest, journalism, and to curtail freedom of speech, as well as generally exclude fellow citizens, including cyclists, skateboarders, buskers, and the homeless, how can we perceive the creation of these spaces as anything but an attack on our fundamental rights as citizens?" End quote. So this is clearly something we should be aware of and ensure that we preserve the remaining truly common ground in our cities. But I think something more significant has shifted our relationships with public space since moving to London in 2006, something that has truly impacted on our relationships with one another. In January 2007, Apple announced that it had reinvented the mobile phone. In his latest book, Thank You for Being Late, Tom Friedman recounts a conversation with legendary venture capitalist Joe Doerr. And I think it's helpful to recount this to remember just how revolutionary this technology was at the time. This phone had significantly more processing power, random access memory, as well as flash memory, and it also had no buttons. It had the best media player, the world's best telephone, and the best way to get onto the web, all three in one. Friedman finds that it's not only the iPhone that makes 2007 such a pivotal year. A whole group of companies emerged in and around that year, and together these companies and innovations have reshaped how people and machines communicate, create, collaborate, and think. Companies were established enabling people to write and collaborate on software, as well as increase storage capacity. In 2006, Facebook, which had previously been confined to users on a college campus or college campuses, was opened up to everyone, and in 2007, Google launched Android to allow other smartphones to develop with an alternative operating system to Apple's iOS. In 2007, AT&T invested in something called software-enabled networks, expanding its capacity to handle cellular traffic created by this smartphone revolution. Friedman discusses other developments in his book. From the Kindle and YouTube to Airbnb, he terms 2007 a vintage year in terms of technology. But for the purpose of this lecture, I'm particularly interested in the development of smartphones and the surrounding infrastructure that's enabled that technology to flourish. So, mobile phones are everywhere, and we all know this, and they're incredible. They give us greater global connectivity than ever before. But what about the connections to our immediate environment? I don't know if you need any academic studies to back up my thinking here. You just have to look around on public transport, on the street. Everyone is looking down, tuning in to whatever it is that's stimulating them at that very moment, wherever in the world, or on cyberspace, or wherever that happens to be. Tali Hatuka and Erin Tok work in urban studies at Tel Aviv University and have conducted significant studies into how our telephones have impacted our relationships with public space, on our observations, our understanding of privacy, and our connections with one another. They gave lengthy surveys to 150 mobile phone users, some with smartphones and some with old-fashioned mobile phones that don't have internet connectivity. This research was published in 2012, so the study was done prior to this at a pivotal moment where it was possible to identify a reasonable sample of people who had traditional non-smartphones as well as smartphones. They measured the impact of smartphones on privacy, behavioural codes, and the use of public space. Their research found that although spaces such as parks, public squares or public transport were once seen as spaces to convene, smartphone users are now more devoted to their devices than their immediate surroundings. Smartphone users were 50% less likely to be bothered by others using phones in public spaces, and 20% less likely than regular phone users to believe that their private phone conversations were irritating those around them. Smartphone users were also 70% more likely than regular phone users to believe that their phone gives them increased privacy. And they were more willing to reveal very private issues in public space. In addition, phone users were asked to describe places that they'd visited just 10 minutes earlier. Smartphone users couldn't remember much at all, perhaps because they weren't paying much attention in the first place. In their research, they define portable, private, personal territory, or PPPT. They suggest that smartphone users are under the illusion of being in a private space even when they're in public. They are more likely to have private conversations in public, and they're more detached from their physical surroundings. We are clearly very attached to our phones. They are portals for us to tune in to many of the things that make us who we are, to our friends, our music, our films, our access to information. But I think it's interesting for us to consider what these devices mean for our relationships with one another and the public space around us. Hatuka and Tok essentially suggest that these phones mean that we're walking around surrounded by private bubbles. I'd like you to do something now, perhaps usually discouraged in a lecture theatre. I'd like you to take out your mobile phones, if you have them. So I would like you to consider the myriad of relationships, interactions, and knowledge gained via this device. I'd like you to hold it in your hand. Feel its weight. It's incredible what this thing opens up for all of us. Close your eyes. Consider how this device makes you feel. A fleeting moment of joy ignited through an emoji from the right person, or perhaps the fear that you feel when your data is running low. This is a window on so many different relationships and experiences. I suspect mixed emotions may arise. Open your eyes. Now I would like you to go to the clock, if you have one, on your phone, And I'd like you to set the timer for 1 minute. And I'd like you to make sure that your alarm is on loud. Now, if you've done that and you feel comfortable to do so, I would like you to exchange your phone with a person sitting near you. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask them to make any calls or send any texts or check your social media. I'd just like you to hold someone else's phone for less than a minute. Just less than a minute. Just swap your phone with someone next to you. For me, this is a kind of 21st analogy to walking in someone else's shoes. We take great security from these devices. Access to networks, connections, knowledge is greater than ever before, and this gives us an increasing opportunity to tune in on demand to whatever we choose, to whatever we are looking for. And I would like you to just consider that for a moment, holding someone else's phone. You can give your phone back to your friend if they know how to turn the alarm off now. Thank you for playing that little game with me. You can turn your phones back onto silent now. I've never done that before. Thank you. So today, with those alarms and that moment, I invite you to burst some bubbles. To burst bubbles of your expectations, to burst bubbles that you usually tune into. Now I would like you to think about all of the places that you usually go outside of domestic environments. Where are you most likely to not tune in to whatever's happening on your mobile phone? And I want some suggestions of this from you guys. So where are you most likely outside of your home to not be looking at your mobile phone, and what kind of places? So a space that you're kind of being entertained and you're captivated by something else. Anything else?
Doing exercise.
You're not going to take it into the swimming pool, are you? Lectures. If the lecturers are lucky, so maybe the gym, maybe somewhere where you're being entertained, maybe a mosque or a church, maybe even a museum. Strictly speaking, these spaces aren't public. I like to think of them as quasi-public spaces. They might be owned by private organisations, but they're broadly open to a range of people that give you an opportunity to engage in different kinds of activities and ideas. And unlike pseudo-public spaces that I discussed before, the rules in these spaces are slightly more obvious and transparent. So I'm pretty biased in this context, but I think museums have a vital role to play in this new world that we find ourselves in. People do tend to put their phones away in museums unless they're taking snaps for Instagram or calling to meet a friend. And I think that we have a responsibility to bring different ideas together more than ever in this context. Now, before I go on, let me set some context for you on where I'm working now. I oversee the programmes of events, exhibitions, youth projects and publications at Wellcome Collection in London. We're a museum and library aiming to challenge how we all think and feel about health, and we do this by bringing different perspectives together from art, from science, from history, from medicine, and perhaps most importantly, from life. Wellcome Collection is part of Wellcome, a global charitable foundation devoted to improving health for everyone by helping great ideas to thrive. The organisation that I work for was founded on the death of Sir Henry Wellcome in 1936. He was a pharmaceutical entrepreneur, a businessman, philanthropist, and avid collector. This is Henry. He grew up in America and trained in pharmacy, and then moved to the UK and set up a very successful pharmaceutical business with his partner, Silas Burrows. He was a real marketeer and brought the idea of compressing powders into tablet form to the UK. He marketed this as the tabloid. His business was very successful and lucrative, and this funded his other passions into the research of health and different cultural approaches to medicine. Henry was an avid collector. He was very interested in the art and science of healing through the ages, and he had collectors working on his behalf internationally to find objects from around the world. In his lifetime, he amassed over 1 million objects, ranging from dentist chairs and surgical equipment to paintings and Chinese sex stimuli, as well as Napoleon's toothbrush. He had a furious and seemingly endless idea of what belonged in his collection, and we have a tiny part of it on display in Wellcome Collection today in this space, which is called our Medicine Man Gallery. So when we opened in 2007, we aimed to be a space for people over the age of 14 to explore the connections between medicine, life and art. In some ways, we tried to reimagine Henry Wellcome's vision for a museum of mankind in a 21st century setting, exploring health and medicine in a very broad cultural context. At that time, there were very few science engagement opportunities for adults in the UK. Unlike science centres that well serve children and families, we wanted to create a mature space to explore big questions relating to health and humanity. We tend to start with a big theme in which medicine has a crucial role, but where other perspectives are vital in order to meaningfully do justice to the subject matter. At that time, I was part of a small team, and we weren't sure if it was going to be a success. We hoped that we might receive around 100,000 visits a year, but by our 5th year of opening, we'd had over 500,000 visits a year, so clearly there was a great appetite for our kind of work. This is the exhibition that we opened with. It was called The Heart. In this, our historical understanding of the heart was explored through original illustrations by Leonardo da Vinci. Contemporary medicine was considered through a heart bypass machine, and the symbolism of the heart was uncovered through country and western songs and contemporary artworks. On this slide, you can see a young woman, Jennifer Sutton, and she donated her own heart to feature in the exhibition following her heart transplant operation. This is her coming to visit. To accompany this exhibition, we programmed events ranging from drumming workshops, exploring the beat of the heart, to heart surgery, where we filmed a surgical operation happening in a hospital and relayed it live to our audience in Wellcome Collection so that they could ask the surgeon questions, giving them a chance to speak directly to someone who was in theatre. From the very outset of Wellcome Collection, we aimed to bring different perspectives together to allow multiple interpretations of the themes that we explored, vitally giving space, time and respect to those different views. We take a non-didactic approach and encourage our audience to ask questions more than give them answers. We are led by the spirit of inquiry, as are many of the different disciplines with which we work. Since the heart, we've explored subjects including dirt, skeletons, and Japanese outsider art. I recently found a quote by American author, poet, environmentalist and activist Wendell Berry, which I think really cements where my thinking is at. In his work, Life, a Miracle, an essay against modern superstition, he states, "Freedom in both science and art probably depends upon enlarging the context of our work, increasing rather than decreasing the number of considerations we allow to bear upon it. This is because the ultimate context of our work is the world, which is always larger than the context of our thought." At Wellcome Collection, we always place our ideas in the broader context of life, because this is where our audience join us from. We have a duty to stay relevant to them. So bringing different disciplines together was always at the heart of things for us. And this seems pretty logical to me. Of course, the idea of science and art being separate fields is a relatively new idea. In ancient Greece, Pythagoras connected music to maths and astronomy, and in the Renaissance, there wasn't this great divide between these two endeavours. But since science has been defined as a separate activity somehow sanctified by reason, non-scientists in society have responded to it, sometimes commending it and celebrating it, and sometimes reacting against it. Some of the most instrumental non-scientists have been artists and activists. At Wellcome Collection, we endeavour to bring different ideas together to reveal the complexity of life to our audiences. I'll now talk you through 4 case studies relating to obesity, nature, auditory hallucinations, and finally, our audiences. These case studies have burst bubbles for me personally. They've made me look up. In a world where we have access to so much information at our fingertips, public spaces like ours are vital in revealing that we just don't quite know everything yet. So first of all, obesity. We have an incredible sculpture in one of our galleries. Here it is. It's called I Can't Help the Way I Feel, and it's by artist John Isaacs. This is one of the most popular provocative exhibits in the gallery. It's a real conversation starter. Before I go on, how would you describe this? Anything else?
Mesmerizing.
Anything else? Grotesque. Thank you. In 2016, we worked with a freelance curator called Alice Carey to run a large-scale event for us exploring body language in the broadest possible sense. This happened all over the building on a Friday night, and there were many activities at the event exploring non-verbal behaviour, voguing, as well as social robotics, among many others. One of the creative people that Alice selected to take part in the evening was Charlotte Cooper. Charlotte is a scholar, writer, psychotherapist, and fat activist. Just to remind you, the museum that I work for is run by a global medical foundation. Charlotte's challenge to the medical model of obesity was a very difficult one for me, but it was vital for us to consider this from her perspective. She is sick and tired of the derogatory language surrounding obesity, and fair enough. It felt exciting to provide her with a platform to very publicly explore this subject with our audience. On that night, she did a talk to contextualise her work, produced a zine, and danced in front of this sculpture. This is how Charlotte described this sculpture, and I will read this from her zine for a little time. So this is in her words. Here is a universalised fat body, let me start again. Here, a universalised fat body is rendered as a diseased, pitiful, sexless, grotesque blob on legs. I think the title is stupid and affected, so I call it The Blob. The blob has no head or identity. It is an unending eruption of abjection. I am one of the most prominent and accomplished fat scholars and activists in the land, maybe the world, and I can't handle this space. I saw it once and never returned. It's one of the things that makes me feel that, for fat people, the welcome is really, wait for it, unwelcoming. Wherever I am in the building, I know where I am in relation to this display, the blob in particular. It's like we're attached with a string. One of my survival tactics is to try and disregard the hatred of fat people like me and try and live my life on my own terms. But that strategy does not work here. The hate is there, endorsed and celebrated at the highest level, transmitted as though it were truth through the profound arrogance of medical science. Sometimes I've been to the building and have had to go past it, so I avert my eyes, but I know it's there. I feel on edge, sick, tense, wherever I think about it. Even writing this has given me backache. She later goes on. I hope that my talk, my dance, my zine, my presence helps raise some questions about obesity in medicine now. I've wanted to say this stuff since 2007, and only now have I had the opportunity to do so. This is a risky thing. I'm biting the hand that feeds and potentially alienating the kind of and thoughtful people who have invited me in and supported my work so generously. But who else is going to say something? The curators who commissioned Obesity in Medicine Now are unequipped to tell the stories that my comrades and I are able to tell. Fat people are not yet organised enough to target something like this collectively. So I'm saying something, and I might not ever be invited back to say anything here again, because what I'm saying is not pretty. I do what I can do, but it can never be enough, and it comes at a cost. I had never thought about this. I shamefully never thought about how this sculpture would make a fat person feel. This was in 2016. I'd worked in this organisation for 10 years. Of course, we must acknowledge that Charlotte represents one perspective and not all, but it was surprising and very challenging for me personally for this to have such an emotive response. Seeing Charlotte's dance and reading the zine made me look up. It burst a bubble for me, and I have never looked at this sculpture in the same way since. I see it nearly every day. So case study number 2. At Wellcome Collection, we often work with people who have specific life experiences alongside artists and researchers, and this was acutely true for this project that we did exploring auditory hallucinations. The Hearing Voices Cafe was conceived and developed by Spanish artist Dora Garcia, and this project has run in various cafes and galleries around Europe, but it hadn't been to the UK before. The motivation is ambitious but simple. Around 15% of people have auditory hallucinations, perhaps through psychosis, but perhaps due to other reasons, sometimes spiritual or due to multiple personality disorder. These people hear voices in their heads as if they were hearing voices that are actually in the world. The only difference being that those voices are not in the actual world. They only exist in the minds of that individual person's experience. For the purpose of this presentation, I will call these people voice hearers. There is a great deal of stigma associated with auditory hallucinations, and this project aims to raise discussion and awareness about this, giving people a chance to talk about it in public. This work was inspired by the artist's interest in the voice hearing movement, which has its roots in the anti-psychiatry groups of the 1970s and conceives of itself more as a civil rights movement than as a form of therapeutic self-help. The first joint activities came about in Holland in 1987 with the mission of challenging the medical model of mental illness, and from there spread rapidly to other countries. It has a very active network here with the English Hearing Voices Network. Voice hearing is a widespread phenomenon, but also a culturally and historically significant one. From Socrates and Mother Teresa to Sarah Kane and Virginia Woolf, voice hearing has been considered in some cases a rare talent, a special gift, and in others a very negative experience. This project is made up of a neon sign that is very clearly a signal that this space is a space to talk about voice hearing. It also includes a bookshelf full of books that relate to the history, psychology, and cultural reference of voice hearing. And then conversations are convened between voice hearers and other members of the public, as well as perspectives from psychology, psychiatry, anthropology, and history. We worked with local organisations, including the Hearing Voices Network and the Dragon Cafe, as well as a group based in Durham, who are an interdisciplinary research group called Hearing the Voice, up at Durham University. These events were made up of people with lived experience of mental health challenges, as well as different researchers and interested members of the public. The conversations were very carefully facilitated by a range of different people, many of whom were voice hearers themselves. In this slide, you don't see any audience members because these were intimate conversations involving some vulnerable people, and it wasn't very appropriate to take photography. But this slide does give you a sense of the prominence that this had in the building, the visibility of that. One person saw a sign up in Wellcome Collection and attended the event. She sat and observed and started to share her own experience of hearing voices. After the event, she let my colleague know that she'd never talked to anyone about this before. She didn't want to go and discuss her voice hearing in a therapeutic context because for her, her voices weren't a symptom of her illness, they were just part of her life. In a public context, with the anonymity that that brings, she felt moved to share her personal experiences for the very first time. Another person at one of these events claimed that she too heard voices in her head all the time when she was doing things like thinking about what to put on her shopping list. A young woman at the event addressed her. "Can you close your eyes?" she said. "Can you hear the two boys just over there beyond the stairs talking?" "Yes," the first woman said. "That's how clear I hear voices in my head, as if they were actually here in the same room, only they're not." "Oh," the first woman said, "I understand." Those events made people look up. They burst some bubbles. As well as considering perspectives from anthropology, history, and psychology, they made people consider one another's personal experiences. Case study number 3. In 2017, we explored the theme of nature. We started with a temporary exhibition called Making Nature: How We See Animals. This exhibition examined how we think, feel, and value other species and the consequences that this has on the world around us. It brought together over 100 fascinating objects from literature, film, taxidermy, and photography to reveal the hierarchies in our view of the natural world and consider how these influence our actions or inactions towards the planet. It was organised around 4 key themes: ordering, displaying, observing, and making. And the exhibition charted the changing fashions of museum displays alongside society's changing attitudes to the world around us. It examined our search for an authentic encounter with nature and looked at how humans have intentionally altered other organisms. So this exhibition explicitly examined our relationship with animals, but we wanted to explore our broader contemporary relationship with the natural world. We were quite baffled by this challenge. Everyone is so overexposed to communication around climate change. We wanted to have a different approach. And we wanted it to be a really meaningful encounter for our audience. So we decided to create this. This is a museum of modern nature. This exhibition, which followed the one that I've just talked about, was crowdsourced and made up entirely of objects and stories donated from our public audiences. By honing in on individual stories, we tried to create opportunities for people to think differently about their relationship with the world around them. Many of us think of nature as something separate to ourselves, something elsewhere, somewhere to visit and not part of our daily lives. Yet in reality, nature is either all around us or it's nowhere to be found. In this modern age, there are no places that aren't affected by humankind's impact on the planet. So whether we live in densely packed cities or rural countryside, we are a part of a complex ecosystem with the plants, animals, land, air, and water that we need. We worked with several different nature experts, ranging from a mountain climber to a dairy farmer and a park keeper, as well as a plant scientist and materials expert, to inspire our audiences to consider what to donate. We ran some events with our audience to understand what nature means to them. And here are a few of the quotes from those events, just to give you a sense of what was bubbling up in our audience. "Everything that's not me is unnatural to me." The phrase "back to nature" implies that we have left it. The word conservation implies keeping everything the same. I don't think we can any longer make a distinction between nature and man-made. Looking forward, what is it that we want? We wanted to shine a light on how each and every one of us connects with nature. People approached us with all sorts of things, ranging from artworks and scientific instruments to everyday ephemera. After being open for 10 years, we had defined a very interdisciplinary audience. We provided strict practical guidelines for people on what they could bring. And of course, ironically, because we are a museum and have conservation guidelines, our audience couldn't bring in anything living at all. Over 200 people participated and brought in an incredible array of objects together with their stories. We photographed and documented them. Then we entered into the tough task of deciding what would actually go on display. We were keen to avoid having a strong institutional voice, so the nature experts who we selected made many of the choices of what we should display. In the end, we showed around 50 objects in total. Many of the objects had accompanying audio, and I'm just going to play a couple of these for you to give you a sense of the voices that were in the exhibition.
The prayer mat is something that I use 5 times a day. The prayer mat actually takes me down to the earth, go completely down onto my forehead. It's called Citadel, where I'm very close to the earth and very close to God. We have 5 prayers, and the early morning one, which is like, I woke up today at 4:30, just before 4:30 in the morning, and that's when everything is quiet, everything is so peaceful, you know, and it's just me, my prayer mat, and actually dedicating myself to God. During the daytime, you know, I'm taking that 5 minutes from work, it's just performing the prayer, but the feeling that you get with in the morning prayer is very different. While everybody's sleeping at home, you're just in that little corner doing it. Although, you know, I really admire plants, trees, you know, when the blossoming happens on the tree, I love that. But that only happens once a year. You know, and flowers are only around seasonal. But the prayer mat and going down into the position of sajda is all season round for that whole year. It's very close to the earth.
The data sheets represent my relationship with one family of night monkeys. They were the black-headed night monkey, and data sheets enable natural primate behaviour to be documented in numerical form, providing the basis for scientific analysis and discussion. I think I was drawn to the fact that they were nocturnal, and I like walking around in the forest at night, and they hoot like owls on the full moon, so they're rather intriguing. I do like a challenge, so manoeuvring around the rainforest at night is really exciting. I created a platform where I could observe them quite well, so I was the same height as them, so I could actually see their behaviours in their nest all day long. I chose to record the behaviour of each of the animals, so there are 3 animals in the family, the male, the female and the infant. So every minute from dawn till dusk, I collected the behaviours. The data set that I collected represents 753 hours observing this family of wild owl monkeys. I managed to publish this data in a research paper with my professor, Giuseppe Donati, and so we confirmed that the black-headed night monkey was a nocturnal animal. It's probably one of the most incredible things I've done, is to have the opportunity to just live beside them. I felt incredibly privileged to be able to do that, and I'll definitely do it again.
Me and my sister found the crabs when we were walking our dog in the Medway Country Park in the Thames Estuary when we were maybe 10 and 12. There were loads of them, like hundreds of crabs on the beaches, and stuff. So we picked them up and put them in dog poo bags to bring them home, and then we made coffins out of cardboard to put them into. I think we were reasonably serious. We did take time to make the coffins and decorate them and place all the crabs inside. They didn't really need to be in the coffins. I think it was more we wanted to feel like we'd done something for the crabs rather than the crabs actually needing something to be done for them. Yeah, we didn't want to bury them. I guess we put quite a lot of work into making them, so to bury them in the ground would be kind of a waste.
So I'm sure you can all imagine what a prayer mat and primatology data looks like, but what about the crab coffins? Here they are. So together, these people created a collective snapshot of how we think about nature in the 21st century and explored how the health of our planet is inextricably linked and bound up with our behaviours and values among ourselves. A museum of modern nature gave people a chance to think about something close to them and then reveal it to thousands of people who came to see the exhibition. It made people look up. It burst a few bubbles. Now finally, onto my 4th case study, the reading room. So this is our reading room, a Wellcome collection. We wanted to create a space that was not constrained by a prescriptive, curated exhibition narrative, but something that our audience had to navigate on their own terms, just like you have to in a library. It has over 1,000 books, so it is partly a library. It has incredible objects, so it's partly an exhibition space, and it has over 50 seats in it, so you can sit down. It has a warm, luxurious domestic tone, so it's a space to sit and talk and listen. Like a library, we wanted it to be somewhere where the audience could explore for themselves. There are over there are just 10 broad themes in the space, including breath, body, lives, travel, the mind, and these inform different niches and provide the audiences with a way in. Of course, the team spent lots of time thinking about how to encourage interactions between people in the space when they were designing it, but we knew that we'd have to create activities to seed this, as the audience wouldn't be brave enough to just strike up connections with one another. So we planned a new strand of pop-up events. These events happen within the space, and people gather around the small niches of tables and chairs where other members are just milling around. These are different from our previous strands of programming for a few reasons. First of all, they just pop up. We don't tell our audience about them beyond the building, and with them we aim to provide our audience with unexpected opportunities to delve deeper into our content. Someone might pop into the museum for a cup of coffee or to see an exhibition and end up having a conversation with a surgeon, or in this case, performance artist Joshua Sofa, about our founder's nose. Secondly, they're unpredictable. We don't know how many people will turn up. Our target audience is 10 people, but we expect anywhere between 2 and 50 people at these events. And thirdly, these events have to draw on the expertise and ideas of our audience as well as whoever is leading the activity. This way, audience members have more of a chance to connect with one another. So we were surprising our audience with these small-scale activities all the time. And the intimacy of these events meant that they had opportunities to engage with one another in really meaningful ways. But we wanted more. We wanted our audiences to drive the agenda further. So in 2015, we launched Open Platform. We invited anyone at all to propose an idea for an activity to take place in the reading room. We asked that they just abide by the rules that we set for the space, which we put on our website, and that it had to involve the audience, so standard lectures were not accepted. And we also said that it had to last for just an hour. Seeing what has come in and seeing it come to fruition has been totally eye-opening. Events have included a laryngectomy choir made up of people who have had their voice boxes removed, and they came to perform in the space as well as have a conversation about body image and communication. Another event that I remember was run by an artist with dyspraxia, a neurological condition that affects coordination. It just so happened that another person with dyspraxia came to the event that day. They just happened to be in the building. And there were also other people there who had no prior knowledge of this condition. This audience member said that dyspraxia, for him, felt like being a fish trying to climb a tree. Being a fish trying to climb a tree. What a powerful metaphor to share with a random group of people that weren't expecting to encounter an event on that day. And of course, this made me and others at the event on that day look up. It burst some bubbles. So to conclude, the world is getting smaller all the time. Connectivity and public space are changing. We have a greater opportunity to connect with one another and different ideas more than ever before. But overwhelmed by this expanse, many of us tend to stick with what we know, the familiar territory. I think we have a duty to crack that open a bit. I hope I've given you a little flavour of how I endeavour to open that up for and with our collaborators and audiences. Interdisciplinarity is a slightly overused term to me, probably because of the environment that I inhabit. But I think it's time for us to reflect on who created these disciplinary boundaries in the first place and understand their limitations as well as their values. It's amazing and vital to work between and across disciplines, to punctuate one another's silos, to discover new knowledge. But convening different ideas in public contexts affords us an entirely different and quite magical opportunity. An opportunity to explore things on a genuinely level playing field, out in the open. Perhaps it's time to stake claim on the value of inquiry for the sake of inquiry and ensure we're involving anyone along the way who can help us meaningfully explore whatever it is that we're seeking to uncover, whatever school of thought or walk of life we come from. So I hope I've encouraged you to look up and burst some bubbles. Consider the space that you're occupying, the academic territory that you're working in, the workplace or the locality that you inhabit, the newspapers you read, the radio station that you tune into every day, the books you consume. Just take a moment and consider something else. Tune into that for a bit. Be open to the opportunity of finding something unexpected. You never know where it might lead. Thank you.